For tonight's homework, we're starting a new unit called Samples and Populations. Today in class, you learned about measures of center and measures of spread, also called measures of variability. And for tonight's homework, you're going to practice finding the mean, the median, the range, and also the MAD, the mean absolute deviation. So make sure you've had a chance to complete page 4 and then correct your answers with this option. Find the median for Jared. When we find the median, we have to list all the numbers in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to take Jared's numbers here and list them. 6.4, 8.1, 8.5, 9.5, and 10. And then I'm going to find the center number, so you can cross off, for example, and I will see that the center value is 8.5. The mean for Jared is what? Well, for the mean, I need to add up all the numbers. So 8.5 plus 8.1 plus 6.4 plus 9.5 plus 10. And at that point, I'll get a sum of 42.5. And then my next step for finding the mean is to divide by the number of numbers. So in this case, I'm going to divide by 5 because there were 5 dives. That gives me a mean of 8.5. What's the median for Pascal? I'm going to list Pascal's numbers in order. So again, I have 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9.2, and 9.3. Crossing off again, I get a center number of 8.5. So the median is 8.5. What's the mean for Pascal? I'm going to go ahead and add all these numbers. So 9.3 plus 7.5 plus 8 plus 8.5 plus 9.2. That gives me a sum of 42.5. Now I'm going to divide that sum by the number of numbers, which in this case again was 5 because there were 5 dives, and I get 42.5 divided by 5, 8.5. So now compare the measures of center for the 2 divers and write at least 2 complete sentences. Remember, this is one of the most important skills that you can practice right now because a big piece of the 7th grade standards is that you can compare data sets. So looking at what I see here, I can see that their measures of center have a lot in common. So I might have written that the mean, or the median, was the same. And I'm going to reference that it was 8.5 here. So the median was the same, 8.5, for both divers. I'm also going to note that the mean was the same. 8.5 for both divers. So that might lead me to think that they dived similarly. Now let's practice finding the measures of variability, also known as the measures of spread, for both divers. What's the range of Jared's dives? For the range, I'm going to do the maximum value minus the minimum value. So in this case, Jared's maximum value was a 10, and his minimum was a 6.4. That gives me a range of 3.6. What about Jared's MAD? Well, if you remember from today, we have to first know the mean, and the mean was 8.5. So I'm now going to compare every single dive of Jared, so looking at this row, to that original mean. So I have 8.5 minus 8.5. That's a difference of 0. Right? That was my first value. Then 8.5 minus 8.1. That gives me 4/10. Then 8.5 minus 6.4. That gives me 2.1, 2 and 1/10. Still continuing on, 9.5. I'm going to flip the order here, 9.5 minus 8.5, because I want the absolute deviation, so I'm going to get a positive value. That gives me a difference of 1. And finally, I have a 10. So 10 minus 8.5 gives me 1.5. So now I can find the sum of the absolute deviations. So I'm going to add 4/10 plus 2 and 1/10 plus 1. Oops, wrong spot to put that in. And plus 1.5. And I do know also that that 0 is included in there as well. So when I add those up, I get I'm going to carry the 1. I get 1, 2, 3 plus 2 gives me 5. So my sum is 5. And when I divide now, I'm going to divide by the number of data values. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data values. So 5 divided by 5, I get 1. So looking at all that information, that tells me some important things about the variability of Jared's dives. Now, what is the range for Pascal? Well, again, the maximum minus the minimum. Pascal's maximum value was a 9.3. His minimum was a 7.5. So when I subtract those two, 9.3 minus 7.5, I get 1.8. So 1 and 8/10. And then I'm going to find the mean, or actually the MAD. So go ahead and think about what is the MAD for Pascal. So the mean for Pascal was 8.5, just like for Jared. But now I'm going to think about how close are those exact data values to the mean. So I'm going to start with 9.3 here. So 9.3 minus 8.5, that's a difference of 8/10. Then I have 8.5 minus 7.5. That dive was 1 away from the mean. Now I have 8. 8.5 minus 8, I get a half. Now I have 8.5. 8.5 minus 8.5, I get 0. That matched exactly with the mean. And now I have 9.2. 9.2 minus 8.5, I get 7/10. I'm going to find the sum. So I'm going to add all these up. So I have 8/10 plus 1 plus a half plus 0 plus a 7/10. And when I add them up, 8 plus 5 would give me 13. 13 plus 7 would give me 20. And I get 2 plus 1 would be 3. So I have a sum of 3. And now I'm going to divide. So 3 divided by 5 data values would give me 6/10, also known as, you could have written it as a fraction 6/10 as well, or as the fraction 3/5. So now I'm going to do some comparing. So compare the measures of variability for the two divers. Write at least 2 complete sentences. So looking at these divers, whose numbers were closer together? Well, if I want to know whose numbers were closer together, I'm going to look at the range, for example. So this would tell me that, for example, Pascal's variability was less than Jared's because he had a smaller range. So in this case, we were comparing 1.8 versus 3.6. Another way to think about the variability, though, would be to compare the MAD. So I could also say Pascal's dives, or values, were closer to the mean. This might make me think that he's a more consistent diver because his values averaged only 6/10 away from the mean versus Jared's values averaged a full point away from the mean. So again, I'm going to write Pascal's values were closer to the mean, more consistent, because he had a smaller MAD. So again, in this case, 6/10 versus 1. As we were mentioning, your families may not be able to support you as much with the MAD because MAD is kind of a newer concept with Common Core. So if you're struggling with understanding what the mean absolute deviation is, I would highly encourage you to look at the Khan Academy video that's linked from our blog. That's a helpful example of finding the MAD. You're also going to do more of that tomorrow in class with larger data sets. So make sure that you are comfortable with those concepts, or at least you know where to find additional information if you need some help. See you tomorrow.